We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and...
King Charles did not summon the press. He did not call a family meeting, issue a warning, or allow anyone time to prepare. Instead, behind a closed door at Windsor Castle, he placed one private document beneath his hand and signed away the last opening Meghan believed remained within the monarchy. The decision took less than a minute. Yet when William learned what his father had done, the future king reportedly stood motionless, unable to speak. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the paper before him would change more than access. The Crown Instrument, a formal written order issued under royal authority, named Prince William as sole permanent guardian of the Royal Family Legacy Archive. That archive held letters, recorded memories, ceremonial objects, and material linked to Queen Elizabeth II, Princess Diana, and the monarchy. The wording barred non-working royals, including Meghan, from using it for personal, commercial, charitable, or media projects. The king read the exclusion clause twice. His private secretary waited beside the desk, because Meghan had asked for access to material connected to Diana, saying it could help Archie and Lilibet understand their royal heritage. Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the page, and signed without changing a word. When the secretary reached for the document, he kept one hand over it and said, "Not yet." The decision was settled, but the emotion was not. William received the notification at Kensington Palace and began reading while standing. He reached the line transferring authority to him, stopped, then lowered himself into a chair. The prince had expected delay, negotiation, perhaps compromise. Instead, his father had removed his freedom to reconsider the request informally and made his son responsible for enforcing the boundary. Meghan learned through her legal representative, not from Charles. The palace message stated that archive access was now outside the sovereign's personal discretion, making the decision unmistakable. A second clause went further. No material could be loaned to documentaries, memoir projects, exhibitions, foundations, or private commemorations without William's approval. The king had not rejected one request. He had built a wall around the monarchy's most sensitive memories. Then William saw the detail that changed everything. A documented briefing attached to the instrument showed Charles had not chosen him merely because he was heir. The decision traced back to something Meghan had said in an earlier private exchange, words the monarch had never forgotten. And as William stared at the signature, one question became impossible to avoid. What had Meghan said that convinced Charles there could be no second chance? To the public, the decision looked administrative, a monarch assigning responsibility to his heir. Inside the family, it felt painfully personal. Charles believed he was protecting the crown from another cycle of exposure. Meghan believed she was being cut away from a history that belonged partly to her children. William, caught between them, understood that his father had given him authority, but also handed him a burden capable of reopening every wound the family had tried to seal. Charles had watched private family pain escape palace walls too many times. Conversations became headlines. Old grievances returned through interviews, documentaries, and public accusations. The Royal Family Legacy Archive, a protected collection of private letters, recordings, objects, and historical material, represented one of the last places where deeply personal memories could remain controlled. For the king, protecting it was no longer about tradition alone. It was about stopping another family wound from becoming public property. Meghan saw something very different. Her request centered on letters and recorded reflections linked to Diana and Queen Elizabeth, especially material touching on motherhood, royal isolation, and raising children under intense scrutiny. She believed Archie and Lilibet should not have to discover their family history through television clips or newspaper archives. When the palace response reached her in California, Harry stood near the doorway as she read it. Her expression tightened when she reached the sentence, placing future authority entirely with William. Harry did not immediately defend the request. He asked whether some of Diana's private material had ever been intended for anyone beyond the family. Meghan looked up sharply. His hesitation mattered, because it exposed the fear beneath the argument. Even he worried that once deeply emotional records left royal control, their meaning could change forever. The silence between them became heavier than the document itself. William felt no victory either. At Kensington Palace, Catherine watched him fold the instrument and slide it back into its envelope. A crown instrument was simply a formal written order carrying royal authority. But this one felt brutally personal. She asked whether he planned to call his father. He answered, "Not until I know why he chose today." His voice remained calm, yet the untouched tea beside him told another story. Charles had already anticipated resistance. Copies had gone at the same time to William, the keeper of the royal archives, and the palace legal office, leaving no family objection capable of delaying the transfer. The decision had been designed to become effective before Meghan or Harry could privately persuade him to soften it. Then William noticed the date. Charles had signed the instrument exactly 1 year after Meghan made an earlier private request concerning the same archive. Palace records showed that meeting had unsettled senior officials and strained the king's relationship with his heir. The timing was deliberate. The decision had shocked William, angered Meghan, and unsettled Harry. But the true fracture began 12 months earlier, during a private encounter that everyone involved had tried to forget. The conflict did not begin with the document Charles signed at Windsor. It began 1 year earlier, inside a quiet reception room after a memorial service, when Meghan made a request that sounded deeply personal but carried consequences no one in the palace could ignore. Charles listened without interruption. William watched from across the room, and when one particular condition was mentioned, the king's expression hardened so visibly that a senior aide later described the moment as the real point of no return. The silence after St. George's Chapel carried into Windsor Castle. St. George's Chapel is the royal church inside Windsor, where major family services and ceremonies are held, and that afternoon, the mood remained unusually restrained. Charles, William, Harry, and Meghan gathered in the green drawing room after most aides had stepped away. Meghan asked for temporary access to selected letters, recordings, and personal reflections connected to Diana and Queen Elizabeth. She said the material would help Archie and Lilibet understand the women whose lives had shaped their father. Charles softened at the mention of his grandchildren. He asked whether the project would remain private. Meghan answered carefully. It would begin as something personal, she said, but it might eventually support a charitable educational project about motherhood, pressure, and women living inside powerful institutions. The king did not reject the idea. For several seconds, he appeared to consider it. William changed the mood with one question. He asked who would control the final material if the project ever became public. Meghan replied that she would need creative independence, so Diana and the late Queen would not be filtered through palace protection. The prince heard something sharper beneath those words. To him, it sounded like an accusation that the monarchy had spent years shaping his mother's story for its own protection. Then came the request that changed everything. Meghan asked for written permission to quote directly from archive material, without requiring final palace approval. Charles stopped turning the signet ring on his finger. A signet ring is a traditional ring associated with personal authority and family identity. But in that moment, the gesture mattered more than the object. He looked directly at her and asked, "You want the material but not our right to protect it?" Meghan answered that palace protection had too often become palace control. William pushed his chair back sharply. Harry immediately said his brother's reaction was proving her point. Charles ended the argument before it could explode, telling all three that no decision would be made that day. The room felt different after Meghan and Harry left. William expected fury from his father, but Charles remained beside the fireplace looking wounded. According to a documented account later attached to the archive review, the king said quietly that family memory could not survive if every act of trust became permission to publish. That evening, Charles ordered a confidential legal review into who could control archive access after his death. He told no one outside a narrow circle, not even William. And when the future king eventually discovered that his father had spent an entire year building the restriction in secret, shock turned into something darker. The belief that Charles had chosen him for a burden he had never agreed to carry. William did not confront the king in front of courtiers. He waited until the last aide had left, closed the heavy library door, and placed the crown instrument on the table between them. Charles remained standing. His son did not bow, soften his words, or pretend the appointment was an honor. He asked one question. "Did you choose me because you trust me, or because you needed someone else to deliver the refusal you could not face yourself?" Charles understood immediately that this was not a meeting about procedure. William had come to challenge the reason behind the decision itself. The king's library was a private working room where sensitive family and state matters could be discussed away from staff. And on this day, no equerry, secretary, or legal advisor was allowed to remain. The prince accepted that the archive needed protection. What he could not accept was being named without warning, because every future refusal would now appear to come from him. William's frustration hardened. He told his father that the appointment had made him the permanent face of no. Harry would not see a careful safeguard. He would see proof that his brother was being prepared not only to inherit the crown, but to control access to their mother's history. The future king warned that the decision could deepen a family divide that was already close to breaking point. Charles finally answered with something William had not expected. He admitted that guilt had become part of the problem. Decisions involving Harry's children no longer felt simple to him, because every refusal carried the fear that Archie and Lilibet might one day believe their grandfather had rejected them personally. The king said William would still be carrying responsibility long after the current anger had faded, and that was precisely why he had chosen him. Then William stepped closer. He asked whether Charles would have signed the same instrument if Meghan had never made her request. The monarch hesitated. That pause said more than any prepared explanation. William understood immediately that the restriction was not only about protecting procedure, it was also a direct response to what Meghan had demanded. Charles then cited the confidential legal review. According to the documented analysis, even limited archive access could allow private material to be paraphrased, reconstructed, or publicly referenced without technically copying the originals. Meghan's demand for editorial independence had exposed what advisors considered a dangerous gap. Once words left royal control, the palace might never control their meaning again. The king opened the instrument to the signature page and turned it toward his son. He said William could reject the role, but the restrictions would remain. The prince closed the document with one firm movement and answered that he would not run from anything involving Diana's memory. Then Charles revealed one final detail. Another senior royal had supported the decision and urged him to act before Meghan returned with a second formal request. William had expected a legal strategy. Instead, he discovered a family alliance, and the person standing behind his father's decision was someone Meghan had once believed might defend her. The king did not reach his decision alone. While Charles carried the emotional burden and William inherited the authority, another royal had studied the danger with colder eyes. Princess Anne had reviewed the proposed safeguards, questioned the palace lawyers, and identified the weakness Meghan's request could exploit. Yet her involvement was not driven by dislike. It came from a promise made years earlier, one involving Diana, private papers, and the damage caused when grief becomes public property. Anne had seen what happened when private royal material left controlled hands. Letters were quoted without context. Personal memories became arguments. Old pain returned in new forms. As one of the longest-serving working royals, she understood palace procedure, but also the cost of family exposure. A working royal is a family member who carries out official duties on behalf of the monarch, and Charles trusted her judgment because she rarely allowed emotion to decide what duty required. William arrived at St. James's Palace already angry. He asked why she had supported the instrument without speaking to him first. The prince felt the decision had been built around him, while keeping him outside the room. Anne did not deny it. According to a documented account of their private exchange, she told him that asking for his opinion would have forced him into an impossible choice: protect Diana's legacy or appear cruel toward Harry's children. Anne's voice tightened when Archie and Lilibet came up. She said children should never inherit punishments created by adults, and William immediately understood that her position was not personal hostility. But the Princess Royal also insisted that sympathy could not become permission. If a project might later move into public, charitable, or media use, then access to private family records could never be treated casually. Then she explained the clause that had changed everything. Anne had urged palace lawyers to attach authority not simply to William as a man, but to the office of the heir. That meant the responsibility would eventually pass to the next person in direct succession, rather than disappear with him. The guardianship was therefore not temporary. It was designed to outlive Charles, William, and the present family conflict. William challenged her again, and this time she revealed why she had pushed so hard. In a recorded recollection prepared for the legal review, Anne described a private conversation with Charles after Diana's death. They had agreed that deeply personal material concerning the princess should never be released simply to satisfy curiosity or answer every public accusation. Nothing was signed. Yet she had treated that promise as binding ever since. Then William noticed the sealed inventory on her desk. He reached toward it, but Anne placed her hand over the cover and said, "This is exactly why procedure must come before emotion." A moment later, she removed her hand and let him read. One entry stopped him cold. Meghan's request had included material he had never been told about. A private recording Harry had once asked to hear and had been denied. The decision was no longer only about Meghan, because the archive held something Harry had wanted long before she ever entered the argument. For Meghan, the crown instrument was rejection. For Harry, it became something more painful: confirmation that a voice from his past would remain beyond his reach. Buried inside the archive inventory was a private recording made during Diana's lifetime, a reflection on motherhood, duty, and the futures of her sons. Harry had asked to hear it years earlier. Charles had refused. Now William controlled it, and the younger brother's grief rapidly turned into fury. Harry read the inventory entry twice before speaking. The recording came from a confidential oral history project, meaning a private recorded account created to preserve personal memories rather than broadcast them publicly. According to the archive description, Diana had spoken about the pressure surrounding William and Harry, the weight of duty, and her fear that royal life might eventually pull her sons in opposite directions. That made the recording more than history. It made it painfully personal. Harry had asked Charles for access years earlier. The king refused because Diana had never given clear permission for the full recording to be shared, even with her sons. At the time, the Duke had taken that refusal as another example of the palace deciding what parts of his mother he was allowed to keep. Now the same recording sat under William's control, and old anger returned with new force. Harry turned to Meghan and asked whether her archive request had included it. She hesitated, then confirmed that advisors had listed the recording as relevant to the family project. Meghan insisted she wanted it for Archie and Lilibet, not for public exploitation. But the answer still cut deeply. He asked why she had not told him separately. She replied that Diana's legacy should not be divided into pieces controlled by palace permission. Harry answered that his mother's voice was not material for any project, however personal the intention. The argument left both of them shaken. Meghan received the final restriction in writing and found William's name attached to every future decision. She circled it, then pressed the pen down hard enough to crack the casing. Any appeal would now have to go through the brother with whom trust had almost completely collapsed. Charles's hidden reason made the situation even heavier. A documented archive note showed that Diana had spoken about one son becoming trapped by the institution, while the other might define himself through escaping it. The king had feared those words could become another weapon in the brothers' conflict, rather than a source of comfort. Harry walked away from the argument alone and lowered his head against a stone wall outside. Meghan watched from inside, but neither spoke for several minutes. Then the Duke instructed his representative to challenge the instrument. The palace legal office rejected the move, stating that no personal appeal could suspend William's authority. And just as another public battle seemed inevitable, William contacted Harry directly. No lawyers, no spouses, no aides, no recording devices. For the first time since Charles signed the decision, the brothers would speak without anyone standing between them. And what William was prepared to offer would change the meaning of the entire confrontation. There were no palace officials in the room, no legal folders on the table, and no spouses waiting behind adjoining doors. William and Harry met as two sons, rather than opposing royal camps. Between them sat a small archive player containing the recording neither brother had heard in full. William had not brought it to surrender his new authority. He had brought it because he had finally understood that protecting history did not have to mean using silence as a punishment. William had chosen a discreet room at Kensington Palace and insisted that Harry arrive alone. Neither man would brief the media afterward. The prince made that condition clear because this meeting was not about titles, security, status, or public arguments. It was about Diana. The crown instrument allowed supervised private access, meaning material could be heard or viewed under controlled conditions, without copying, photographing, transcribing, or taking it away. Charles had expected caution, but he had never ordered his son to refuse Harry forever. William set the boundary before anything else could be said. Meghan would not receive archive material for her project, and the recording would not leave royal custody. Harry immediately accused his brother of hiding behind procedure. Then he noticed the player. His anger changed. The Duke admitted that for years he had imagined what his mother might have said about the different paths her sons eventually chose. Part of him feared she would condemn him for leaving. Another part feared she might condemn William for staying. William answered more quietly than Harry expected. He said neither brother could keep using Diana to prove that the other had chosen the wrong life. Then he reached forward and pressed play. Diana's recorded voice did not speak about rebellion, succession, or victory over the monarchy. According to the preserved recording, she spoke about her fear that her sons might one day become symbols before they were allowed to remain brothers. She hoped they would protect one another from that fate. Neither man interrupted. Harry understood something in that silence. Charles's decision had not erased him as Diana's son. It had created a barrier between private family memory and public campaigns, media contracts, or competing narratives. William's authority could still allow compassion without surrendering control. The recording ended. Harry kept staring at the silent machine. William reached to remove it, but his brother placed one hand over the player and asked for one more minute. The prince withdrew his hand. He waited. No grand apology followed. Harry did not withdraw every accusation, and William did not forgive every wound. but the Duke agreed not to challenge the crown instrument publicly. In return, his brother promised that Archie and Lilibet would one day be offered private, age-appropriate access to their family history without cameras, commercial conditions, or public pressure. The agreement remained secret, yet the outside world noticed the change almost immediately. Harry's legal challenge vanished. Meghan released no immediate statement. Buckingham Palace began preparing an announcement. The family had found a narrow path away from open war. But once the decision reached the public, one newspaper image would turn a private act of protection into a national judgment on Meghan, Charles, and William. By sunrise, the decision that had moved through sealed envelopes and private rooms belonged to the entire country. Broadcasters called it a constitutional safeguard. Critics called it a calculated royal rebuke. Supporters praised Charles for protecting the monarchy's most personal history. Yet one front page captured the emotional violence of the moment better than any debate. Charles signing at Windsor, Meghan shown outside the palace gates, and William placed between them beneath three brutal words: "The door closes." Buckingham Palace confirmed what the family had spent days containing. William had been appointed permanent guardian of the royal family legacy archive, the protected collection holding private royal letters, recordings, objects, and personal historical material. The official statement stressed preservation, privacy, and protection from unauthorized public or commercial use. But the public heard something simpler. Charles had drawn a boundary, and Meghan stood on the other side of it. Charles watched the coverage from Clarence House. One broadcaster described the instrument as the strongest move yet against the Sussexes. The king switched off the television before the segment ended. Camilla remained beside him as he said the decision had been made to protect the future, not punish the past. She asked whether the public would understand that distinction. He did not answer immediately, because even he knew how difficult that would be, once private pain became national debate. William felt the pressure hours later. As he arrived at an engagement, a reporter shouted, "Will you ever let Meghan into the archive?" The prince paused but kept moving. His tightened expression was replayed across evening broadcasts, turning him into the public face of a decision he had never asked to announce. Outside Windsor Castle, the argument became impossible to miss. A small crowd gathered near the Long Walk, where visitors often approach the royal estate. One woman held a handwritten sign declaring, "Diana belongs to her sons." Several feet away, another person raised a second message, "Memory is not merchandise." A widely circulated photograph captured both signs together, and suddenly the entire dispute seemed reduced to those two opposing ideas. Meghan said nothing. Her silence created more speculation than any interview could have produced. Commentators asked whether she was preparing another challenge or respecting Harry's private agreement with William. Then, a palace source gave one carefully limited statement to a documented media briefing. "No legal action is pending." William understood immediately. Harry had kept his word. The public debate remained divided, with broad support for protecting private archives, but real sympathy for Archie and Lilibet's connection to their family history. Yet the loudest argument was already beginning to fade. Then Charles summoned William, one final time. The world believed the king had chosen the crown over reconciliation, but what he told his son next revealed something far more painful. The decision was meant to save a relationship Charles no longer knew how to repair himself. When William returned to Windsor, the document was no longer on Charles's desk. The signature had entered royal history, the restrictions were active, and the public had already delivered its judgment. Yet the king did not speak first about Meghan, the archive, or the constitutional power he had exercised. He spoke about Archie and Lilibet. He told William that one day the children might ask why a door had been closed, and that the answer must never make them feel the crown had closed its heart as well. Charles met his son in the same study where the decision had first become final. The atmosphere was calmer now, but nothing about it felt easy. The royal family legacy archive, the protected collection holding the monarchy's most private historical material, had become more than a storage system. It had become a test of whether family memory could remain personal in an age when every grievance could become public content. The king admitted that placing William in charge had forced him into a conflict he had never asked to carry. Charles explained why he had accepted that cost. Private memory, he said, could not remain sacred if access came with publication rights, creative independence, charitable branding, or future media use. His relationship with Harry had become so fragile that kindness could be mistaken for strategy, and boundaries could be interpreted as punishment. The monarch feared that case-by-case decisions would eventually be shaped by guilt, anger, or public pressure, rather than principle. William finally answered without bitterness. He admitted that at first he had believed his father had used him as a shield, but hearing Diana's recording beside Harry had changed the meaning of the responsibility. The future king now understood that guardianship was not simply the power to deny. It was the duty to protect private compassion from becoming public ammunition. Charles opened a drawer and removed a small key. He placed it into William's palm. The key opened the inner archive cabinet, containing the most restricted family material. William closed his fingers around it, but he did not move until his father released his hand. In that quiet moment, authority stopped feeling like victory and became responsibility. Meghan's project was finished as originally imagined. She could not use the archive, quote its contents, or gain independent editorial control over its material. She accepted that no legal route remained and made no public challenge. Harry reached a different ending. He retained supervised private access as Diana's son, but according to the brothers' documented agreement, the recording would never enter a memoir, documentary, campaign, or commercial project. Archie and Lilibet would one day be allowed to encounter their family history privately, without cameras or contracts. The final meaning was clear. Charles had defied Meghan's demand, but this was never truly about defeating her. The king protected the crown, William protected the archive, and Harry protected Diana's voice from becoming another weapon. The door to public use was closed for good, but inside the family, one private path remained open. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.